Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you'll learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm your host, Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
Welcome to episode number 1. Our very first episode, and we're both super excited to be here with you today.
And a little nervous.
This is true. In today's show, we're going to introduce ourselves to you, tell us a little bit about why we're here, talk about what Break Free and Trust means to us, how it impacts our lives and how we live, and then how it can impact your life and how you can benefit from our experience in our work. Sound okay to you?
That sounds great.
All right, why don't we just jump right into it? Jacqueline, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them what brings you here, right here today?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I was walking back from our yoga studio this morning and I was thinking that so many of our introductions are about our credentials. And actually, in some ways, that goes totally against some of what you and I speak about all the time. And so I will share my credentials with you, but more importantly, I'll share why they're significant and insignificant, I suppose. I think first and foremost, I am a mom of 3 beautiful kids, and that span the ages of 13 to 18. I have a background in clinical psychology and Chinese medicine. And I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher and group facilitator. And probably, and a breath worker and a number of other things. And why that's relevant is that I have experience in those areas. Why it's irrelevant is that from our experience collectively, it seems that what we have to teach and share has very little to do with what we've studied and so much more to do with our lived experience. And so my promise to you as an audience is that I will share with you what I've walked and what I've lived and what I've experienced and what served me in that experience and what served others that I've worked with through the experience. I will not teach you from a book because that's not my expertise. That's somebody else's. And I think that's really, that feels really important for me to share from the get-go. I am a therapist, but I see myself much more as a guide and a teacher, a mentor, if you will. And my goal for the people that I work with and for you, our audience, is for you to feel like I'm walking with you and learning with you and growing with you. Because that is my experience. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I quite like the way you framed that about, sitting down and just, sharing our credentials doesn't really get at the heart of who we are. And I suppose what I'm about to share is it's more of a framework and a high level story. Okay, so my credentials are: I'm a father. I'm also a Kundalini yoga teacher. I'm a transformational life coach, a metaphysicist, facilitate men's groups, and I sponsor many, many men in recovery. And recovery from substance abuse is a big part of my journey, and it's going to show up a lot in our discussions. What things relevant to my story is I had a 25-year career in finance, which I needed to walk away from at the peak of that career. And that also plays very much into who I am. and, have these credentials. But I think really what it is the culmination of that experience, of that journey, has brought me to this place now where I feel there's a message I need to carry. Um, there's a way I'm choosing to live my life that I want to share with other people and model to other people. And I'm really feeling I'm showing up in purpose for the world now to bring these experiences I've had of coming from, um, call it a high to a low and back up again, that can benefit other people. And I'm here to share that work with them.
Yeah. And I'm struck, in terms of, I'm struck when I think about that both of us in so many ways are doing much of the same work in terms of, we're both coaching, we're both counseling, we're both teaching and facilitating. And yet our work is so different and complementary at the same time. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. And it's like, I think we joked around with this at a retreat and I made this comment that didn't land well, that Jacqueline teaches from the lower chakras and I teach from the higher chakras. And if those of you are familiar with the chakra system could interpret it one way, which you did at the time.
So did. I was so insulted when he said it. And yet, it's dead on. It's totally true. And so where that really stands is the lower chakras are very much the in body of the earth, raw, emotional, human sort of experiences. And I teach that way. I am so of this earth and I walk this earth and my emotions are open and honest and real and I'm straight up. And I relate to people in that way. And it's really important to me because I think that that's where that is my lived experience, which means that that's where I really have to teach from. Whereas Chris operates in the higher chakras on a much more metaphysical, much more spiritual level. And that is your expertise. And the balance between us in that way becomes our collective gift. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think to put it in context, and I don't know if this is a male versus female thing. I think I've encountered more men that relate the way I do than women. But I remember this from when I was going to see a counselor or therapist and asked me, where do you feel in your body? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't feel anything in my body. What are you talking about? And still to this day, when I'm asked that question, I don't relate to it. Because how I interact with this creation is through intuition, knowing, sensing, feeling into other people, but from a heart and mental aspect, understanding what people are feeling intuitively. But I don't have this grounded, embodied connection to the world, which Jacqueline does. And I think that's what often makes our teaching when we come together so powerful, as we're coming at all this from these two entirely different places, two entirely different perspectives, but trying to answer often the same question. And we come to some really interesting conclusions because of that.
I think we also have some really interesting conversations, even just amongst ourselves around it, which is that, it could be seen, well, let me go back. I think there are times in our conversations where I have felt that sort of your inability to really connect and engage with the body has put us in a place where you feel cold to me, or I don't understand. How come you don't feel what I'm feeling? Or, and I could make you bad in that. And yet what's happened is that as we've gotten more and more curious about each other, rather than needing you to meet me where I am, being really curious about where my message or what I'm saying lands for you, and the reflection then that you can give back to me, has really shifted my ability to also understand myself, and actually has given me great perspective. And that's been a huge gift, both in our relationship and then in how we teach. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember these discussions, and others who feel into it the same way I do. I know how you feel, or I know how people feel, but I don't join in the feelings. And that can be very different. And I think one of the things I've really learned from you in this is that that can come across as very cold for people and invalidating and not being understood. And that's helped me shift my perspective on how I carry my message and how I work with people. And often it leads me to say, I'm the wrong teacher for a certain individual, or I'm the wrong person to give this message because I'm not feeling into it the same way they are. So there's this profound teaching back and forth between us as we connect with these things in materially different ways.
Yeah. And I think that there's something that's happening both for our students, and for us, where there's this, as you come top down and I come bottom up, there's a meeting, and the meeting in the chakra system is in the heart. And I think that that's actually what happens for us as well, is there's a meeting place at the center, which is the heart, which is both informed by intuition and spirit and informed by emotion and feel. And the combination, it lands pretty well. And so it gives us an opportunity with all of you to be able to meet you in a bunch of different places. And inherently, as we move forward with this podcast, Chris will meet you in the places that we spoke to that are much more spiritual and intuitive and metaphysical. And I'll meet you in the rawness. And our dual perspective actually ends up being a whole perspective, I think, in some ways. Does that make sense?
I think so. And can you give me an example of how this shows up in the way you teach and operate?
Sure. I mean, we taught a class last night, and we taught a class around fear. And in the teaching, what I brought forward was an experience of fear that I was having in my body in that lived moment, so that I could bring fear into the room in a way that felt aligned and real, that was palpable, to invite the people that we were working with to tap into a fear that was alive in them. That makes sense?
Yeah. And in that example with our students, after you expressed that, I talked about fear from a metaphysical standpoint, that not the fear of the tiger in the room, but the other type of fear that it's a mental projection. That's an opportunity for us to surrender to the divine, to surrender for God from a metaphysical consciousness standpoint. And the combination of that was powerful.
Right. So what we're doing in many ways is that we're moving from lived experience and then moving out to the broader understanding of that, and then coming in and out. And so, one of the biggest signs of dis-ease or sickness in the body is stagnation. And our invitation is constantly to move into flow, right? And when I get stuck in the minutia, you bring me out. And when you speak out in that grander perspective, sometimes I call you in because it doesn't make sense to me in the moment. Mm-hmm. And there's a natural flow there.
Yeah. And our students benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope you will too.
Okay, everybody, why don't we take a short break here, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Break Free and Trust. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And where do we leave off, Jacqueline?
Well, we were just talking about what brought us here today in terms of our credentials. And we were talking a little bit about how we work together. But I think it'd be a really interesting time now to talk a little bit about what break free and trust means, because that's really what brought us to where we are today. And I'd love to start with you. You've got a big story to share. There's a lot of breaking free. You alluded to some of that with, a big 25-year career in finance, turned transformational life coach, yoga teacher, and sponsor. Can you help our audience understand what break free means and what it is you broke free from?
Yeah. And where do I start? Because break free and trust is the name of the entire show. So it's these are going to be all the episodes, but why don't I say this? Breaking free of the conditioning and mental programming that I was not even aware that was driving everything in my life. And it wasn't bringing me to a place of peace and happiness. So what do I mean by that? Here I was, not even that long ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, this career in finance, dream job, amazing company, amazing people, um, great family life, more money than I ever imagined being able to make, the nice cars, the nice house, all these amazing things, all the stuff that I set out to achieve, all the stuff that, sort of told this is what you're supposed to do. I'm a 10 out of 10 on the outside. That's the societal scorecard. But on the inside, I'm a zero and I'm going lower. And it was a progression for me. And over this period of time, to cope with this sort of gap, I would take on coping skills. And it started off by extreme exercise or running that marathon or ultra marathons or boxing, and where it goes. And that worked for a little bit. And then it didn't. And suddenly these other coping mechanisms came in: alcohol, then drugs, and then all the other stuff that comes with addiction. Ironically, it was addiction to drugs and alcohol, which was the catalyst for me to become aware. And I don't mean the addiction itself, I mean the recovery from these things. Addiction is this extreme form of powerlessness, of living from the power of this mental prison that addiction is. That's guiding and dictating every action you take in your life. And breaking free from this addiction was the catalyst to see the world differently. And once I broke free from this addiction and saw that, wow, my mental construct, my mental prison was making me do all these other things, I started to see what other conditioning, what other programming do I have that's also making me act in a way that's really not free will, but some type of a program that has been dropped down on me. And this started off a process of really wanting to understand what that conditioning looked like. What else did I have to break free from? And there's other aspect of the question of trust. So there's this saying that whatever thinking gets you into the problem, the same thinking is not going to get you out. And that's so true. If I could have thought my way out of addiction, man, I would have, but I couldn't. And I eventually just had to surrender to a power greater than myself and recognize that I wasn't in control, and that there's a creative intelligence, a God, or whatever you want to call it, that was in control. And if I just released that control, my life would get better. And slowly but surely, as I surrendered, noticed what I needed to break free from, my life got better and better. That was my experience.
Can you speak a little more about that higher power? Because I think for a lot of people, they don't really understand what that means. And for some of you, it may even turn you off.
Yeah. And it would have turned me off too. 5 years ago, lived a pretty non-spiritual life for the first 48 years of my life. And by grace, I got to this point of desperation where, again, just surrendering, my own thinking had taken me in this direction, and it was going to go into three places. It was going to be a jail, an institution, or death. So I needed to get up to something else, and I didn't even know what that thing was. But I knew there has to be something out there that is controlling the universe. I'm not making the sun come up. I'm not making the moon go down. I'm not responsible for all these things that are happening. I'm barely responsible for how I feel. And I wondered what it would be like if I just surrendered to the fact that I wasn't in control anymore.
I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you, and like something is sort of popping up as you're speaking. And that's this place of giving something up to a power greater than yourself is not letting go of personal responsibility of yourself. Mm-hmm. It's having faith in something greater than yourself. Yes? It's having faith in something greater than yourself is controlling, but it's giving up this idea that you were ever controlling anything in the first place. So there is a giving up in this false illusion that we actually are controlling all these things around us. For instance, I don't control the way you feel or think. That's beyond my control. I think that this is actually a really amazing conversation for us to have as an entire podcast.
I agree.
Because I think there's this real place of we don't actually have control, but there is a level of personal responsibility that we have in terms of our actions. And then working with both of those in tandem feels really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's put a pin in that for
Yeah,
another show.
we'll come back to that.
How about you? What does break free and trust mean for
Hmm.
you?
We'll come back to the lower chakras. For me, break free and trust is really about breaking free of all of the breaking free of the people pleaser, um, breaking free of the idea that I am living up to some version of what I think other people's expectations are of me, or my expectations of myself. All of the roles I think I'm supposed to play. The idea that I think really, if we really get into it, for me, break free of the idea that um, I'm only lovable if I'm capable, and if I've got my shit together, and if I am, I'm the rock. I'm doing it, and breaking free of the need to always be okay. So, this is probably again a whole other show, but this journey for me wasn't one of addiction. It was one of my marriage, and divorce was actually a huge catalyst for growth for me. And in the last 10 years, that growth has been exponential. And in the last 3.5 years, even more so. But really breaking free of all of these preconceived ideas of what gave me value in this world, and slowly but surely letting them go. And, you know, we'll come back to this body piece again, because you're going to hear this from me over and over again. But it was ultimately, I remember the day that I was driving and I was on the phone with my mom, who's a really important person in my life. And she, when I was growing up, my mom got cancer, and she's a 2-time cancer survivor. And I remember my mom was a people pleaser too. And my mom needed to get really sick to get better. And for a very long time, I had this sense that that wasn't my journey. I didn't need to get sick to heal. Um, but I was sitting in the car and I called her, and I can remember the constriction in my throat where I felt like I was essentially being strangled, but I was being strangled by the life that I had created and by all of the stories and roles that I had taken on. And I called her and I said, if I don't leave my marriage, I'm going to end up really sick and I'm going to die. It's time. And it was in that moment that I realized that my body had been telling me all along. I mean, I had so many throat issues, so much so that I had this ball that had almost grown. It looked like I had a growth in my neck, and you could see it. I went to doctors for it, but there was nothing there. It was all energetic. But my body was screaming that this wasn't okay for me, and I kept trying to swallow it. And so, the people pleaser became the truth seeker and the truth teller. And it was interesting. I lost some people in my life. I gained a lot of new, wonderful people in my life. But most importantly, I gained a really deep love for myself. And my 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 points of reference really changed. My point of reference became, am I in alignment with me or not? And so the trust piece for me became, at the time, it became less about God or a higher power. And it became, can I trust in me? Can I trust in me to be in alignment with me? Can I trust that when my body says no, that I honor my body? I often teach that when our body's thirsty, we're meant to drink. When our body's tired, we're meant to sleep. But we override those messages all the time. And when we're tired, we drink coffee. And when we are thirsty, we eat. And the body is just like a person in some ways. Trust is built in increments. And when we can slowly teach the body that we can be trusted to honor the body honors us. And that's really been what my lived experience has been, this dance with my body, and honoring my heart and my voice. Yeah.
Beautiful. We're going to come back to that. But right now, why don't we take a break? Welcome back to Break Free and Trust. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And we're sort of laughing because of the way we ended that last segment, where I actually demonstrated exactly the difference between us. She was done. It was break time. So I said, great, let's take a break. But what I didn't do, I didn't meet her in the emotionality and the beauty of what you shared. And, better way to have done that if I'm connecting with Jacqueline is, wow, that was a lot. I'm going to invite the listeners and us to sit with it for a moment and take it all in. And that's just a difference in the way that we interact and see things and work with each other and others.
And you know what? I mean, I think part of this is, we're being recorded and we're doing a podcast, and no matter how, real and straight up and raw we want to be, this is new for us too. Yeah. But the beauty in what you just did is that, that really is how we work together. We don't meet each other perfectly all the time. It's impossible to, because we're two different people with two really different ways of seeing the world. But, on break, I said, wow, I felt totally cut off in that. And Chris's response wasn't to get defensive. It was actually to try and understand where he could meet me. And my hope really is that as we fumble together, and, Chris will say something, I'm sure, at some point, and I will roll my eyes or get my back up against the wall. And I hope that we can call each other on it publicly so that you can see how we work with this stuff, because we are incredibly human in our interactions.
Yeah. Beautiful. And even in just, I wanted to follow up from that last segment, that even in you talked about that embodied story of breaking free as the catalyst. And it, again, the difference that it was so different for me at this place I'll call my bottom, for lack of a better word. It was
a bottom.
It was a bottom. It was a bottom. And I got to this place and I almost sort of said out loud, I give up. And then I had this intense knowing, and almost a voice, but it wasn't a voice, said, finally you've surrendered. You're going to be okay now. And for that moment on, I felt this grace, and it was this knowing and this intuition that everything was going to be okay if I just kept surrendering. And so such a difference. And,
I think that actually brings us to what we were hoping to talk about next, which is, when I hear the finally, what I hear is the sense of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sense of freedom, and the word freedom is really helps to describe a lot about how life is different for both of us now than it was 5 years ago. Yeah. And I'd love it if you'd share what's different for you now that you've been able to break free of some of that mental programming. You've been able to, recognize that you are not in control and give some of that up to a higher power. What does life look like for you?
Yeah. And even the word freedom, what does freedom mean to me? It's a sense of freedom in the body I've never had before. And I'm not an embodied person, but I can feel into that. It's a quieting of the mind. I have ADHD. My mind has never been quiet, but there's a real quietness to it now that I didn't actually think existed. But here I am with it. I have less fear. I have less anxiety, less worry, easy to forgive, easy to let go. And, if we're getting into breaking free of the need to be right, to have the answer, breaking free of to the think I need to know, breaking free of caring what others think of me, breaking free of judging others. That's a huge one. And, if I put it in a high level, it's breaking free of this tendency I used to have of seeing the world as problems needing to be fixed, and now interacting with the world as an opportunity to co-create with my creator and others. And it's a totally different way to interact with reality.
It's interesting. And when I listen to you, um, and actually sometimes, I work with you, I live with you, I parent with you. Um, and I watch you sometimes and I sort of, it's almost incredulous. Like I look at you sometimes and I kind of am like, is this for real? Um, it's impossible. It's impossible for it to be so easy to forgive. It's impossible for it to be so easy to be free of all of the things that you speak about. And yet I'm really good at poking holes. Um, there's no real holes to poke in your story. And I say that because, again, I'm of this earth. I am raw, I'm emotional, I'm real, and I'm often messy. And you're not. But you really are honest. And what I experience I mean, you've been an incredible teacher to me over the last 3.5 years or so. Because all of what Chris is speaking to, he does live and he lives it and he breathes it, but he lives it and he breathes it with discipline. He's in practice all the time because these things aren't without checks and balances. These are not easy practices to have. And I guess one of the things that I really notice in observing you, because I really do observe you, is that a huge piece of it is you being in service all the time. And in being in service of others, really needing to walk your talk because it's through your own lived experience that you're able to really do this and help them.
Yeah, and this is getting into the difference on how we operate and relate. And my experiential story came from, and I call this all the time, I got the gift of desperation. I got the gift of the next step in that direction is going to be death unless you start making these changes and letting go of fear and resentment and forgiving people was that next step. And so you can imagine this is life and death situation. Unless I adopt these things as a practice, there's no tomorrow. And so you start taking these things on. And so a lot of the people I work with, a lot of the folks that find me want to walk the path with me are in not all in that situation, but similar enough situations or are looking for that type of guidance. So I relate really well to that group of people. And probably many of our listeners out there are, probably know somebody or have substance abuse issues who have been there and understand what I'm talking about. But there's also this other group of people that haven't got to this place of desperation, haven't got the gift that I don't relate to as well because they don't respond to just saying, well, just forgive them. Don't have resentments. It's like, I don't know what you mean. And that's, I think, where we have great conversations.
Totally, because I do have that experience, which I'll get into in 1 second. But I think it's relevant for us to go back to our yoga class last night in terms of what we were teaching, because we were speaking to fear. And you said something last night that I think is, well, one, it will really help our listeners understand a little bit more about you. Was you were speaking about all of your worst fears coming true. And it was in that, I mean, Chris lost everything. And I'll let you speak to that, but it was in that that you surrendered and that you took on these practices because what else was there? Right. And I think it's worth speaking to that a little bit before we move on.
Yeah. If I took it like at this place of this bottoming process, I was living in 1,000 forms of fear. My whole life was a ball of fear. But I would say the root of all those fears came to a few big ones. It was fear of abandonment, fear of not being worthy of love, and fearing of not enough. And when I got to this place at the bottom, pretty much abandoned by everyone that I loved, and for good reason. I was a disaster. Um, no job, no sense of self worth, no purpose, and really alone and lost and almost in a psychosis. So every fear I had come true, and in this place there was nothing left to fear. And in that moment, again, by grace, I I could see the fact. Oh, fear is the way through. Fear is actually the way to become aware of our programming, to break free. It's actually going through our fears. And I didn't choose them. I didn't say I'm going to be brave and I go through my fears. They just all came true. But there I was, accepting them and surrendering. And from that, I got this valuable life lesson experience that when we find our fears, we name them, we look at them, and we head straight through them, all the magic happens. That's where all the magic happens. And I get to share that with people. And it's such a gift to be able to share that.
I think a couple of things that we didn't mention yet in terms of, what life looks like and how it's different now, having broken free and trusting in a different way. And, what break free means to me and what it means to Chris are two different things. So I can imagine that there are so many different versions of what breaking free and trusting looks like. And, different places that we're each in terms of what that means for us. Um, but I think one of the things that has really shown up for me is breaking free of the victim cycle. And what I mean by that is that in for me, freedom looks like recognizing that, I think it's Einstein, but I don't know. A lot's been attributed to Einstein that isn't actually Einstein. Yeah. But the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves is whether or not we live in a benevolent universe. And if the universe is benevolent, then everything that shows up in our path is for us, it's not against us. And so being able to actually recognize that each step of the way, each obstacle is actually an opportunity, and being able to meet life in that place. And when I'm not able to meet life in that place, to have people in my life, like my husband, like the friends that I've now drawn into my life, to reframe and remind me that this is for me, it's not against me. And where is the learning in it has probably been one of the biggest gifts that's come out of this for me, and has given me an opportunity to always be an actor in my life instead of a victim to my experience. And that has given me a sense of power, but not force, power, to be able to make choices. And sometimes I choose things that are not life affirming, inevitably. But I have the choice to do that. And, again, probably we could have a whole podcast on that. But I'll end this segment of this podcast with one piece, which is that a dear friend of mine used to ask me, he's a mentor and a teacher of mine. He used to ask me whether or not I'd made it to Freedom Mountain. And I never really understood what it meant. And then years later, he said, "So, did you get to Freedom Mountain?" And I said, "I did, but it looks different than I thought it was." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Freedom Mountain for me is having a witness or an observer that's alive enough to be able to notice whether or not to be able to notice my choices and to know whether they're life affirming or life negating, and to be able to make the choice. And so I don't always choose life affirming. But when I don't choose it, I'm making the conscious choice not to choose it, rather than being in the passenger seat to that. And that seems to make a really big difference to me and to a lot of the people that I work with. So I hope it does for you too. And with that, we're going to move to break, and we'll see you again shortly.
And we're back to Break Free and Trust. I'm Chris.
I'm Jacqueline. So I've just been sort of contemplating on the break some of what you were saying in our last segment about, the freedom to forgive and being free of judgment and not taking anything personally, which you didn't mention, but we talk about all the time. And, sometimes I am really struck by how challenging all of that can be, and what a tall order it is for us as human beings who are so fallible and full of what I like to call messiness. It feels like a lot. It feels like a lot to ask of ourselves, and it feels like a lot to ask of our audience and the people around us. How do we work with that? How do you, there's a place where it's like, well, here's the perfect way to live your life. But perfection's overrated. How do we actually begin to live in a way that approaches this?
So that is a fantastic question. And, just in our banter, we've come up 10, 20 different things that you could break free from. You grab all the self-help books off the shelves. They've got another 10, 20 things. There's like hundreds of things. And it's so overwhelming because how could I possibly take all those on?
And sorry to interrupt you, but, you talk about those, self-help books that are on the shelves. Like, there is a place where all of the self-help books sort of leave me in a place of like, I can't even, half of them I can't even read anymore because the place is like, so I'm not okay as I am then. There's all of this other stuff that I'm supposed to be to be this kind of person. What do you do with that? How do you teach people in that regard?
Yeah. And I'd say with that, we're already perfect. We're breaking free. We're already perfect.
I'm perfect.
You're perfect. We're perfect. We're all perfect. But we have some condition we have to break free of. Listen,
I've never been told that before.
We're all perfect children of God. Come on. But no, but it's back to the serious, but like it could be so simple. And I fortunately have this background that started with simplicity for our audience out there that are thinking, God, of all these different things to break free from, like, what do I do? Start by picking one of them and then find an accountability partner. So I'm going to give you an example. Pick resentment. Okay. There's nothing that comes that's good with resentment. It's like drinking a little bit of poison to hurt the other person. Resentments just tear your life down. So I'm going to break free of resentments, and now I'm going to find an accountability partner to work with to help me do this. Again, I'm going to lean in the recovery example because it's so simple. The alcoholic, they really only need to break free of one thing on day one, and they need to stop drinking. All the other stuff, man, it's all cherry on top. They've got to stop drinking. There's no future unless they stop. So what do? They go to AA or another recovery fellowship, and they get a sponsor. They get an accountability partner that knows a thing or two about quitting drinking, and they have a daily conversation with them, a weekly conversation about what's going on in their life, what's the thing that's causing them to maybe want to pick up that drink, and they're held accountable by that accountability partner to break free from that addiction. And that can be expanded to anything. It doesn't have to be alcoholism, but that's a perfect example of how this can be so powerful. And once you break free of one thing, you keep adding to it.
So let's go back to what you were originally saying, which is breaking free of resentments.
Yep.
Can we give them an example about what that looks like in even in our life? Like,
Breaking free of resentments. Do you have an example on resentment?
well, one of the things. So, as I said to you, my experience of you is that you really Chris lives everything he teaches. Um, I think I want him to stop learning so much so there's less of what he lives. Because no, I'm just kidding. But um, there is at any point in time when you and I are engaged in a way that I do something that begins to build a resentment in you, um, without fail, you sit down with me and you talk to me about it because you say, I mean, you speak your words. Resentment is the number one killer of relationships.
Yeah. It's the number one sapper of life. And it's like the correct number of resentments to have in your life is zero. And I tell that to all the people I work with across the spectrum is that the correct number of resentments is zero. They do not add anything to your life. And so when I chat with the people I work with or you, it's like, I sense a resentment here. Let's talk about it because it's not serving you.
Or I'm feeling a resentment here. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about it because it's not serving me or our relationship?
That's right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I keep coming into recovery, and there's lots of our audience like, I'm not in recovery. What do I do? It can be a partner. It can be a coach. It can be a friend. It could be a self-help group. There's limitless, but it's you choosing what you want to break free from based on your own circumstances and finding someone to hold you accountable. And in our relationship, we have a beautiful relationship where we really try to hold each other accountable and we serve as mirrors to each other. And I think one of the things is in your that you can share potentially with the audience is when I first came into your life and I noticed the very strong, I'm going to call it, use the word people pleasing relationship you had with your three kids and how powerful force that was in your life, and question whether or not that was serving you to the extent that it was taking place. How did that manifest for you?
Well, I mean, again, probably a show in and of itself. I think what I would, I'm not sure I'm going to answer that question right now, but I may. When you find an accountability partner, and this is something that Chris and I model with each other and comes back to what he was speaking, was that you need to be gentle with each other. Being a witness and reflecting on what's happening both for yourself and for somebody else is helpful. Any level of judgment around it is not. So now I'll answer what you said is, I'll never forget. This was the first summer that we were together. We were sitting in the car and I was talking to my son who was going into grade 10.
Yeah.
And he hadn't ordered his uniform for school. And I said to him, we were supposed to do this a month ago. What happened? Oh, I forgot. Oh, I thought I was going to do it here. Oh, I thought I was going to do it there. And now he was going to school in a couple of days. And I started yelling. He started yelling. And Chris is sitting in the front seat with me. And now, mind you, I had been a single mother raising these kids for most of their lives.
And I'd known you for a month.
Yeah, he had known me for a month. And so I was doing all of this by myself and overcompensating, being mommy and daddy and trying to people please just trying to do it all to make my kids feel loved. And I'll never forget this hand going on my knee in the car. And Chris whispers, let him fail. So what's going to happen? He won't have clothes when he first gets to school. He'll never do it again. And it was like something in there was like, it was freedom. And I just sort of stopped and I was like, thank you. Thank you for the reminder and for actually showing me that what I thought was so important was actually irrelevant. So I know that the show is sort of coming to a close, and I want to impart something or share something with all of you that that I think is really relevant for us moving forward. And I'll speak for myself first. We are the only expertise that we have is in our lived experience. You are the expert on your life, as I am the expert on mine. I don't care how many books you've read. I don't care how many degrees I have, and it's a lot. They were irrelevant. They are all irrelevant to what it is I'm sitting and sharing with you now. In fact, I'm probably ignoring most of what I learned because my lived experience is not aligned with it. We're walking with you. Our goal in offering this podcast is to share with you in real time what we're learning and how it's impacting our lives, and giving us permission to break free of the shackles that we've walked with up until now. Because what we've found in ourselves, in our relationships, and in our relationship is a level of freedom that we want to share, because it brings with it a level of peace that up until now neither of us have known. And we want to gift it back. We don't have all the answers, but we're walking with you, and we're walking together with you. And we're going to screw up. We're going to mess up. We're going to say the wrong thing. One of you is going to get really angry at us, and that's okay, because life is messy. And if we can walk and figure this out together, then we're all going to be better for it. Is there anything you want?
Oh man, that was beautiful. And I think I'll just add one thing. Show's also called A Redesign for Living. A Redesign for Living is a lifelong journey. And I'm going to be honest with you, parts of it are really, really hard, but it's worth it because it comes with a newfound sense of freedom and a peace of mind. And all we can promise you is we're going to share our journey with you and want you to join us on that path. So thanks for tuning in.
It was great to be with you, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yes. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, A Redesign for Living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.